I had built my life like a museum exhibit, carefully curated and sealed behind glass. Each object had its place. The 3 gray coffee mugs stacked handle out, the pens aligned by color in a ceramic pot, the stack of art books on the corner of my desk forming a perfect 90-degree angle. My apartment was my gallery, a quiet, climate-controlled space where I was the sole visitor and curator. It was a fortress of order against the chaos I felt churning inside me, a silent testament to a life lived under control. From my third-floor window, the one that overlooked the skeletal remains of the old warehouse being reborn, I observed the world. I was a specialist in observation. It was my job, as a graphic designer, to notice the subtle shift in a kerning pear, the emotional weight of a particular shade of blue. It was my nature, as a chronically anxious man, to watch from a distance, cataloging life without ever truly participating in it. For the past 6 months, the main subject of my observation had been Julian. He was the architect on the warehouse project. I did not know his name at first. He was just the man in the navy blue jacket, or the one with the thermos, but names have a way of finding you. I heard one of the construction workers shout it one afternoon, and the name, Julian, settled into my mind like a smooth stone, something I could turn over and over, examining its weight and texture. He was a piece of classical sculpture that had wandered off its pedestal and into the grit of the real world. Tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just blueprints, he moved with an unhurried confidence that I could only dream of. His presence was a quiet anchor in the daily storm of construction noise. While others shouted, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that the wind often stole before it could reach my window. I never heard the words, only the calm, steady cadence of them. My obsession with him was another exhibit in my private museum. It was labeled Impossible Things. He was an artifact from a different world, a world of sun and sawdust and easy laughter with strangers. I saw him talking with clients, a warm, genuine smile creasing the corners of his eyes. I saw him with the crew, clapping a man on the back, sharing a joke that made them all throw their heads back. He was, in every observable way, a part of the world, woven into its fabric. I was just a ghost haunting a window, watching. The most significant barrier, the thickest pane of glass between us, was my own assumption. He was the kind of man who had a girlfriend, maybe a wife, a golden retriever, a life painted in primary colors, bold and certain. My own life felt like a grayscale sketch, hesitant and easily erased. So I watched, and I yearned, and I kept my distance. My routine was my armor. Wake at 6:30. Coffee, black, from the second mug in the stack. Work from 7 until noon. A salad for lunch, eaten while standing at the kitchen counter. More work until 5. Then, the ritual. I would sit in the worn armchair by the window, the one piece of furniture that held any real comfort, and I would watch the day wind down on the construction site. It was my version of television. I learned the rhythm of his days. I knew he took his coffee at 10:15. I knew he had a habit of running a hand through his dark hair when he was studying a difficult schematic, leaving it adorably ruffled. I imagined his scent, a mix of freshly cut wood, clean laundry soap, and the bitter tang of the coffee from his battered silver thermos. It was a scent I had composed in my mind, a phantom fragrance that felt more real than the sterile air of my apartment. This was the nature of my affection, a collection of carefully catalogued details, observed from afar, polished by my own loneliness until they gleamed. He was beautiful and unattainable, and in a way, that was safe. A museum piece cannot break your heart. Then the water came, and it washed my whole world away. It started as a stain on the ceiling, a faint discoloration like a tea bag left too long on a saucer. I noted it, planned to email the building manager, and went back to aligning pixels. An hour later, the stain had grown into a weeping wound, and a steady drip began to fall onto my perfectly polished hardwood floor. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the calm of my ordered world. I grabbed a bowl. The drip became a trickle. The trickle became a stream. Then, with a sound like a giant tearing a canvas in two, the ceiling gave way. Plaster and insulation and a disgusting torrent of rusty water crashed down, destroying my desk, my computer, my carefully arranged books. The deluge was biblical. It was the chaos I had spent my entire adult life trying to keep at bay, and it was here, in the heart of my sanctuary. Within an hour, The building was being evacuated. Firefighters, building managers, and panicked residents filled the hallways. The air was thick with the smell of damp plaster and dread. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, clutching a hastily packed duffel bag containing my laptop, a change of clothes, and, for some reason I could not fathom, my favorite gray coffee mug. I was in shock, a refugee from my own life. The fortress was gone, the museum drowned. I was exposed, standing under the gray sky with nowhere to go. My parents were in another state, my few friends scattered across the city in apartments too small to accommodate a guest. A hotel seemed impossibly complicated, a sterile box of anonymity that my frayed nerves could not handle. And that was when he saw me. Julian was walking away from the construction site, thermos in hand, his navy blue jacket zipped against the evening chill. He slowed as he approached the commotion, his brow furrowed with concern. His gaze swept over the crowd of displaced tenants, and then it landed on me. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met mine. He did not just look at me. He saw me. He recognized me. The guy in the window, a faint flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a look of genuine concern. He changed course, moving toward me with that same unhurried, purposeful stride. The space between us, which had always felt like miles of impassable terrain, shrank to a few feet. "Hey," he said. His voice was exactly as I had imagined it, a low, calming rumble. Up close, it vibrated in the air between us. "You live in this building, right? On the 3rd floor." I could only nod, my throat tight. I was suddenly, painfully aware of my worn-out sweatshirt and the fact that I probably had plaster dust in my hair. "I saw the trucks," he continued, gesturing with his thermos. That's really rough. Is your place okay?" I managed a weak, pathetic laugh. "It's a swimming pool now. They said it'll be at least a week, maybe more, before we can go back in." He winced in sympathy. "Damn. I'm so sorry. Do you have somewhere to go?" The question hung in the air, heavy with my lack of an answer. The shame of it, the utter aloneness of my situation, washed over me. I shook my head, staring at a crack in the pavement. He was quiet for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me, thoughtful and steady. I braced myself for the polite, "Well, hope you figure something out," the kind of empty platitude people offer before moving on with their lives. But that is not what he said. "Look, this is going to sound completely random," he began, and I finally looked up. "But I have a cabin about an hour out of the city. It's rustic. I'm in the middle of renovating it. But it's dry, and it's quiet. I was heading up there tonight to get some work done over the long weekend. You're welcome to come. Seriously, there's plenty of space." My brain short-circuited. The offer was so unexpected, so impossibly kind, that I could not process it. It was a lifeline thrown from a world I was not supposed to have access to. Every anxious impulse in my body screamed at me to refuse, to retreat into my shell, to find a sterile hotel room and hide. But I was not in my shell anymore. My shell was currently underwater. I couldn't. I stammered, the refusal automatic. "Why not?" he asked, his tone simple and direct. "I'm heading there anyway. It's no trouble. Better than a hotel, right?" He offered a small, reassuring smile. "I promise I'm not a murderer." A tiny, hysterical laugh escaped me. "That's a very specific thing for a non-murderer to say," he chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that made something in my chest ache. "Fair point. But the offer stands. My name's Julian, by the way, Leo," I whispered. "Leo," he repeated, and my name sounded different in his mouth. "Solid. Real. So what do you say, Leo? A rustic adventure? Or a week in a beige hotel room?" I looked from his kind, open face to the wreck of my building, the symbol of my wrecked, orderly life. The choice was between one kind of sterile box and another kind of unknown. For the first time in a very long time, the unknown seemed less terrifying than the familiar. "Okay," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay," his smile widened. "Great. My truck's just around the corner." The drive was a 90-minute exercise in heightened awareness. Julian's truck was the antithesis of my apartment. It was cluttered but functional, filled with tools, rolled-up blueprints, and the lingering sense that I had only ever imagined. The smell of sawdust was rich and sweet, mingled with the faint, pleasant aroma of motor oil, coffee, and something that was just him, clean, like soap and cold air. It was overwhelming, an invasion of my senses that was both terrifying and intoxicating. I sat rigidly in the passenger seat, my duffel bag at my feet, my hands clenched in my lap. The man from my window world was real, and he was sitting 2 feet away from me. The silence in the cab was not awkward, not really. It was filled with the low hum of the engine and the soft rock station Julian had playing quietly on the radio. He seemed perfectly at ease, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. "So, a graphic designer," he said after a while, breaking the quiet. "What kind of stuff do you do?" "Logos, mostly," I replied, my voice sounding thin. "Branding. Websites." "I work from home," I corrected myself with a grimace. He shot me a sympathetic glance. "Yeah, sorry about that. Must be a nightmare," he paused. "I've always been amazed by people who can do that. Create something from nothing, just on a screen. I need to build things. Feel them in my hands." He flexed his fingers on the steering wheel, and I found my eyes drawn to them. They were large, capable hands, with clean, short-trimmed nails but a few faint calluses on the palms. Hands that drew plans and then built them into reality. We left the city lights behind, plunging into the deep, velvety darkness of the countryside. The road narrowed, winding through dense stands of pine trees. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. When he finally turned onto a gravel road, the truck's headlights cut a sway through the inky black, finally illuminating a small, simple cabin nestled among the trees. It was exactly as he had described it, rustic. The wood was weathered gray, the porch was a little lopsided, and half the windows were boarded up with plywood. But there was a plume of smoke curling from a stone chimney, and a string of warm yellow lights was strung up over the porch, a welcoming beacon in the dark. "It's a work in progress," Julian said, almost apologetically, as he killed the engine. "The inside's mostly gutted right now. I've been sleeping in the tent while I redo the floors." My heart did a little stutter step. The tent. I had latched onto the word cabin and plenty of space, and had conveniently ignored the more practical details. He must have seen the flicker of panic on my face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Don't worry, it's a big one," he added quickly. "A proper four-season thing. Plenty of room for 2 inch." There it was. The reality of the situation, stark and unavoidable. I was going to be sleeping in a tent. With him. The sculpture from the museum was not just off its pedestal. It was inviting me into its display case for the night. The thought sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through me, followed by a shameful, thrilling flutter of excitement. Inside, the tent was surprisingly spacious. It was tall enough to stand up in, and 2 sleeping bags were laid out on thick sleeping pads, one on either side. A battery-powered lantern cast a soft, warm glow over everything. It felt intimate, a small, self-contained world, zipped up against the vast, dark forest outside. The air inside was already thick with his scent, magnified in the enclosed space. As we settled in for the night, the awkwardness I had been bracing for descended. The simple act of changing out of my jeans and into sweatpants felt like a public performance. I turned my back, fumbling with my clothes, hyper-aware of him doing the same just a few feet away. The rustle of fabric was deafeningly loud. "There are extra blankets in that bag if you get cold," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet. "Thanks," I mumbled, crawling into my sleeping bag and zipping it up to my chin, creating a flimsy cocoon of personal space. He switched off the lantern, and we were plunged into a profound darkness, broken only by the faint, silvery light of the moon filtering through the tent's fabric. The world shrank to nothing but sound, the gentle whisper of the wind in the pines, the distant hoot of an owl, and the sound of Julian's breathing. It was slow and steady, a calming rhythm in the dark. I lay there, rigid, my own breath caught in my chest, listening. Every tiny shift he made, the rustle of his sleeping bag, a soft sigh, was amplified, sending a cascade of shivers down my spine. The warmth radiating from his body seemed to cross the small gulf between us, a tangible presence in the cold night air. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for a verdict I did not understand. Sleep felt like a distant country I had no visa for. I was acutely, painfully aware that the man I had spent months dreaming about from a safe distance was now breathing the same small pocket of air as me, and I had no idea what to do. The next day, a fragile sort of truce was established. The morning light, filtering gently through the trees, seemed to dispel some of the intense, nocturnal awkwardness. Julian was up first, and the smell of coffee and wood smoke already hung in the air when I emerged from the tent. He had a small campfire going, a pot of coffee brewing on a grate over the flames. He handed me a mug, a thick, enameled tin one. Without a word, just a small, friendly smile. That simple gesture felt like an anchor. We drank our coffee in a comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle and spit. The morning was cool and crisp, and the steam from my mug felt warm against my face. "I've got to work on sanding the floors today," he said, finally breaking the quiet. "You're welcome to hang out, read, explore a bit. Don't feel like you have to entertain me. Can I help?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. The idea of sitting idly while he worked felt wrong, like I was a freeloader, a burden. He looked surprised, then pleased. "You sure? It's dusty, boring work. I'd rather be useful," I said, and I meant it. I needed a task, something to focus on besides the constant, thrumming awareness of his proximity. And so I spent the day helping him. He showed me how to use the orbital sander, his hand briefly covering mine to guide the first pass. The contact was purely practical, a teacher showing a student, but it sent a jolt through my system like a live wire. His skin was warm and slightly rough, and the brief pressure of his fingers against mine was something I felt long after he had moved away. The work was monotonous, and the air quickly filled with a fine dust that coated everything, but it was also satisfying. We worked in a rhythm, moving from one end of the main room to the other, the loud hum of the sanders making conversation impossible. It was a different kind of communication, a shared purpose. In the quiet moments when we stopped to change sandpaper or get a drink of water, we would talk. He asked me about my family, about why I got into design. I learned that he had grown up in a small town, that his father was a carpenter, and that he had always loved the feeling of making things. That evening, we sat by the fire again, tired and coated in a thin layer of sawdust. We ate sausages cooked on sticks over the flames, and they tasted better than anything I had ever eaten in a fancy restaurant. The physical exhaustion had settled my nerves, and the conversation flowed more easily. He was easy to talk to, a good listener who asked thoughtful questions. And then, he offered me a glimpse behind the curtain of his own curated life. "I bought this place after a pretty bad breakup a couple of years ago," he said, staring into the flames. His voice was quieter now, more reflective. "I needed a project. Something to pour my energy into that wasn't complicated." I nodded, unsure what to say. The mention of a breakup immediately brought to mind the imaginary girlfriend, the life I had constructed for him. I felt a familiar, dull ache of confirmation. This life. He gestured vaguely at the cabin, the trees, the whole quiet scene. The confident architect thing, managing crews, dealing with clients. A lot of the time I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along. Just pretending to be the guy who has all the answers. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Sometimes the quiet up here is exactly what I need. But other times," he trailed off, poking the fire with a stick. "Other times it's just too quiet." That confession hung in the air between us, as potent as the smell of wood smoke. It was a crack in the marble of the sculpture. He was not the flawless, confident man I had built in my imagination. He had doubts. He had insecurities. He knew what it was to feel lonely. For the first time, the immense distance I had always felt between us seemed to shrink. He was not a museum piece. He was just a man, sitting by a fire, admitting that he did not have all the answers. And that made him infinitely more real and infinitely more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. We stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing, our voices low in the vast stillness of the forest. When we finally retreated to the tent, the space inside felt different. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a new, charged tension. It was the quiet of two people who had shared something real, and who were both acutely aware of the thin barrier of fabric separating them from the rest of the world, and the even thinner barrier of air separating them from each other. The storm arrived on the third night, a sudden and violent assault. It began with a low rumble of thunder in the distance, a subtle warning that we both ignored. Then the wind picked up, whipping through the pines with a mournful howl. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, spattering against the tent's roof like thrown pebbles. Within minutes, it was a deluge. The sound was immense, a deafening roar that swallowed all other noise. The tent, which had felt so sturdy and safe, now seemed like a fragile, flimsy shelter against the fury of the storm. A flash of lightning illuminated the interior in a stark, blue-white glare, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. I jumped, an involuntary flinch, and pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me. The temperature had plummeted. A damp, penetrating cold seeped in from the ground, from the air, from the very fabric of the tent. It found its way through the layers of my clothes and my sleeping bag, settling deep into my bones. I started to shiver, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I tried to still myself, clenching my jaw and wrapping my arms around my chest, but it was no use. The cold was relentless. In the darkness, I heard Julian shift. "You cold?" His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the drumming of the rain. I did not want to admit it. I did not want to be a problem, a burden. But the shiver that racked my body was a truth I could not hide. A little, I managed to chatter out, the lie transparent. There was a long pause, filled only by the storm. I could feel him thinking, could sense his presence in the dark, a locus of warmth just beyond my reach. Then I heard a sound that cut through the roar of the rain, the slow, deliberate pull of a zipper. "Come here." The words were not a command. They were an invitation, soft and hesitant, spoken into the space between us. My breath hitched. My mind went completely blank, and then flooded with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. No. Yes. This is a mistake. I can't. I have to. It was a practical solution to a practical problem. I was cold. He was warm. And yet, it felt like so much more. It felt like a threshold, a line drawn in the dark. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity. The shivering was getting worse. The cold was a physical pain now. And the invitation, the offer of warmth and proximity, was a pull I could not resist. Slowly, cautiously, I moved. The sound of my sleeping bag rustling against the nylon floor of the tent was deafening. I shuffled on my hands and knees across the small distance that separated us, an Arctic explorer crossing a treacherous ice floe. He held the opening of his sleeping bag wide, and I slipped inside, my cold limbs instantly registering the shocking, profound warmth of his body. It was like sinking into a hot bath. The heat was immediate, overwhelming. He zipped the bag up behind me, encasing us both in a cocoon of shared warmth. I was lying on my side, my back pressed against his chest. I was rigid with tension, every muscle in my body screaming. This was too much. Too close. The man from my fantasies was real, and he was holding me. Then, his arm came around me, settling gently around my waist, pulling me more securely against him. It was not a sexual touch, not possessive. It was a gesture of pure comfort, of giving warmth. I could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. Thump thump, thump thump. It was the calmest, most reassuring sound I had ever heard. It was the rhythm of life itself, steady and strong against the chaos of the storm outside. I focused on that sound, letting it anchor me. The shivering began to subside, replaced by a deep, spreading warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. I could feel the slow rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. I could smell the clean, soapy scent of his skin, the faint aroma of wood smoke in his hair. My carefully constructed walls, the glass of my museum, did not just crack, they dissolved into dust. I lay there, held, warm, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt completely and utterly safe. The storm raged on, but inside our small, shared world, it was calm. I closed my eyes, and against all odds, I slept. I woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and quiet. The first, pale light of dawn was filtering through the tent, painting everything in soft shades of gray and blue. And I was still wrapped in Julian's arms. Sometime in the night, I had turned over, and now I was facing him, my head tucked under his chin, one of my hands resting on his chest. His arm was still secure around my waist, his breathing a soft, warm puff against my hair. He was still asleep. In the dim light, his face was relaxed, stripped of the thoughtful concentration it held during the day. He looked younger, more vulnerable. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his dark eyelashes rested against his skin. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the warm, sleepy haze. This was too intimate, too real. I had crossed a line. I had to move, to put distance between us before he woke up and found me like this, clinging to him. Carefully, holding my breath, I began to extricate myself. I lifted my head, slid my hand from his chest, and began to inch away. His arm tightened in his sleep for a moment, a soft murmur escaping his lips, and my heart hammered against my ribs. But then he relaxed, and I was able to slip out of the sleeping bag. The air outside the cocoon of warmth was shockingly cold. I grabbed my clothes and scrambled out of the tent, my movements clumsy and loud in the pre-dawn stillness. The morning that followed was a masterpiece of awkwardness. The easy camaraderie we had built over the past 2 days had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. I busied myself with rebuilding the fire, fumbling with the kindling, my hands shaking. When Julian finally emerged from the tent, he did not meet my eyes. He stretched, ran a hand through his messy hair, and went to get the coffee pot, all without a word. We made coffee. We drank it. We stood on opposite sides of the fire, staring into the flames, the space between us a yawning chasm. My anxiety, which had been blissfully dormant, roared back to life with a vengeance. My brain became a courtroom, and I was both prosecutor and defendant. He was just being nice, you idiot. It was about survival, about warmth. And you made it weird. You snuggled up to him like a lost puppy. He's a kind, decent person, and you took advantage of it. He's probably regretting his offer to let you stay. He thinks you're pathetic. The internal monologue was a relentless torrent of self-flagellation. Every theory I constructed ended with the same verdict. I had misread everything. I had ruined it. His behavior was all the confirmation I needed. He was distant, his movements clipped and efficient. He spoke only when necessary, in short, formal sentences. Need more wood, can you pass the sugar? He threw himself into his work on the cabin with a ferocious energy, creating a wall of noise and activity that I could not penetrate. He sanded, he measured, he sawed, his back always turned to me. The physical distance he maintained felt deliberate, a clear and painful message. I tried to help, but my attempts were clumsy, and I felt like I was only getting in his way. After dropping a box of screws for the 3rd time, I retreated to a stump at the edge of the clearing, defeated. The man who had confessed his own vulnerabilities by the fire, the man who had held me through the storm, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a polite but remote host who clearly could not wait for me to leave. The loneliness I felt then was sharper and more profound than any I had ever felt in my empty, silent apartment. It was the loneliness of having tasted connection, only to have it snatched away. The day dragged on, each hour stretching into an eternity of silent tension. I spent most of it walking in the woods, just to put some space between us, to give him a break from my suffocating presence. I imagined the conversation when we got back to the city. A polite, well, hope your apartment gets sorted out soon. And then we would go our separate ways, and I would go back to watching him from my window. Only now the glass would be frosted over with the memory of this excruciating failure. The thought was unbearable. By the time evening began to settle, casting long shadows through the trees, I had worked myself into a state of quiet despair. I had decided I would thank him, pack my bag, and somehow find a way to call a cab, no matter the cost. I could not endure another night of this. As I was mentally rehearsing my departure speech, he came out of the cabin, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans. He walked over to the fire pit, where I was sitting, and stood there for a moment, not looking at me. The silence stretched, taut and thin. Leo, he finally said my name, and the sound of it made me flinch. Can we talk for a minute? My stomach plummeted into my shoes. This was it. The talk. The polite, gentle rejection. The, I'm not like that, or, I think you got the wrong idea speech. I braced myself, staring at my own hands, unable to look at him. Yeah, okay. I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, and then sat down on the log across from me. He still was not looking directly at me, but at the unlit logs in the fire pit. About last night, he began, and my heart seized. And about today, I've been a complete ass. I'm sorry, I looked up, surprised. That was not what I had been expecting. You haven't, I said automatically. It's fine. No, it's not fine, he insisted, finally turning to meet my gaze. His eyes were troubled, his expression earnest. I freaked out, and I handled it badly. I made things weird, and I'm sorry. I was completely lost. You freaked out? I thought I was the one who made it weird. A small, humorless laugh escaped him. No, Leo, no. That's not it at all. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. Look, I need to just be honest. This whole thing, it wasn't an accident. My brow furrowed in confusion. The flood? No, not the flood, he said, shaking his head. That was just cosmically bad timing. Or good timing, maybe. I don't know. I mean me inviting you up here. It wasn't just me being a good Samaritan. He took another deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into deep water. I've seen you. In your window. For months. I notice things. I notice you. The world tilted on its axis. He had seen me. He had noticed me. The one-way observation, my secret, private study, had been a two-way street all along. I kept trying to think of a way to talk to you, he continued, his voice low and steady now, gaining confidence. Something that wasn't creepy, like just showing up at your door. Every idea seemed stupid. And then yesterday, I saw you standing on the sidewalk, looking so lost, and I just thought, this is it. This is your chance. Don't blow it. He looked down at his hands. So I invited you here. And then you were actually here, in my space, and I had no idea what to do. I was terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. He paused, and then looked directly at me, his gaze intense. Last night, in the tent. Leo, I wasn't just trying to keep you warm. I mean, you were cold, and I wanted you to be warm, but it was more than that. And when I woke up this morning and you were gone, I panicked. I thought I'd crossed a line. I thought I'd scared you off. So I backed off. I tried to give you space. I thought that's what you needed. I was so scared that I had made a huge mistake and ruined any chance I might have had. Every single theory my anxious brain had constructed was wrong. Every assumption I had made was a complete inversion of the truth. His distance was not rejection, it was fear. The same fear that had been tying me in knots all day. He was not pushing me away. He was trying to protect me, and himself. And then he cleared the final, biggest misconception. The breakup I mentioned, he said quietly. The one that made me buy this place. It wasn't with a woman. His name was Mark. The relief that washed over me was so total, so profound, that it felt like I could finally breathe after holding my breath for months. It was a physical sensation, a loosening in my chest, a warmth spreading through my limbs. All the stories, all the assumptions, all the carefully constructed barriers, they all just fell away. Julian, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I thought it was me. I thought you were straight. I thought you were just being kind to this pathetic, lonely guy and that I had completely misread everything. When I woke up, I was so terrified that I'd made you uncomfortable. I've been watching you for 6 months, thinking you were this whole other person living this whole other life that I could never be a part of. The confession tumbled out of me, a flood of its own. Last night was the safest I've ever felt in my entire life. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. It transformed his entire expression, chasing away all the doubt and worry. He closed the small distance between us, moving from his log to sit beside me on mine. He did not say anything. He just reached out and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His hand was warm and calloused, and the touch was grounding, real. He leaned in, and this time there was no storm, no darkness, no desperation. It was a question, asked in the soft evening light. I leaned in to answer it. The kiss was nothing like I could have imagined. It was slow and tentative at first, a discovery. Then, as the last of the tension and misunderstanding melted away between us, it deepened. It was a kiss full of relief, of confessions spoken and unspoken. It tasted of coffee and wood smoke and the clean, crisp air of the forest. It was not the frantic collision I might have fantasized about. It was something quieter, deeper. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. The rest of the week at the cabin passed in a blissful, dreamlike haze. The world outside, with its flooded apartments and deadlines, ceased to exist. Our world was the cabin, the forest, the fire, and the tent. Especially the tent. We no longer slept on opposite sides. We zipped the 2 sleeping bags together, creating one large, shared nest. Falling asleep and waking up wrapped in Julian's arms became a new, cherished routine. We talked for hours, filling in the sketches we had made of each other from a distance with the rich colors of reality. I told him about my anxieties, the carefully constructed walls I lived behind. He told me about the pressure he felt to always be strong and capable, the loneliness that sometimes crept in when he was the only one left on a finished job site. We were two lonely people who had been living parallel lives, separated only by a pane of glass and a set of incorrect assumptions. When the time came to return to the city, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I was afraid that the magic of the cabin would not survive the transition back to the real world. My apartment, thankfully, was still a disaster zone, a fact for which I was surprisingly grateful. "Well, you can't stay there," Julian said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're staying with me." His apartment was nothing like mine had been. It was lived in, comfortably messy. Blueprints were spread across the dining room table, a half-finished mug of coffee sat on a stack of books, and a collection of worn-out boots was piled by the door. It was a space that was not curated for display. It was a space for living. And in the days that followed, I began to live in it with him. We fell into a domestic rhythm that felt both thrillingly new and deeply familiar. We cooked dinner together, navigating the small kitchen in a comfortable dance of bumping hips and shared spoons. We fell asleep on his worn leather couch watching old movies, my head on his chest, the sound of his steady heartbeat a familiar lullaby. I learned that he hummed when he was concentrating, that he was fiercely competitive at board games, and that he had a ridiculous collection of colorful socks. He learned that I needed quiet time to recharge, that I was obsessive about the brand of tea I drank, and that I had a surprisingly dark sense of humor. The intimacy between us deepened, not just in grand moments, but in the quiet, interstitial spaces of our days. A hand on the small of my back as I passed him in the hallway. The way he would bring me a cup of tea without my having to ask. The comfortable silence as we read side by side in bed, our shoulders just touching. These small acts of care were the mortar that filled the cracks in my old walls, making them not barriers, but foundations for something new. I was moving from being a passive observer of my life to an active participant, and it was both terrifying and wonderful. One evening, about a month after the flood, we were getting ready for bed in his apartment. The autumn air had a distinct chill to it, and the radiator was making a gentle hissing sound. As Julian climbed under the covers, he gave an exaggerated, theatrical shiver. "God, it's freezing in here," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief, a conspiratorial grin spreading across his face. I felt a smile tug at my own lips, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the radiator. The callback, the inside joke that was entirely our own, felt like the most intimate thing in the world. I opened my arms. "Come here," I said, my voice soft. He slid over, wrapping his arms around me and burying his cold nose in my neck. I held him close, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid weight of him against me. I thought about my old apartment, my museum of one. I had mistaken order for safety and control for peace. I had believed that if I kept everything in its proper place, I could keep the chaos of the world and the chaos of my own heart at bay. But safety was not in sterile, empty rooms. It was not in solitude. I had been the curator of a life I was not even living. True safety, I was learning, was here. It was in the messiness of another person's life intertwining with your own. It was in the vulnerability of admitting you are cold and the profound grace of being offered warmth. It was in the terrifying, beautiful, chaotic risk of letting someone in and finding that their arms felt more like home than any four walls ever could.